A conspiracy-addled gunman attacks the CDC. This is America Dissected. I'm your host, Dr. Abdul and
And I'm your co host, Dr. Katelyn Jetelina.
we're recording this on Monday, August 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We have to begin today's show on a terrible, horrific note, and that's the shooting at the CDC campus in Atlanta. Shooter was a 30-year-old gunman who believed that the COVID vaccine had caused his depression and made him suicidal. So he showed up to the CDC last week armed with 5 guns. Though he wasn't able to get inside, he opened fire on the building, spraying 180 bullets at the CDC windows. He did kill one police officer in the line of duty. No one at the CDC was physically harmed, and the shooter was found dead, unclear if killed by police or by suicide. The response, I have to say, from RFK Jr. and the White House has been minimal and pathetic. Ask yourself this: what would have happened if somebody opened fire to the tune of 180 bullets on any other government building? What would the response have been? And yet we're not seeing responses out of the White House or even enough from RFK Jr. And certainly it just hasn't hit the news in the same way. And you have to ask yourself if the very same conspiracy theories and the ways that our media have picked them up and failed to cover them are also part and parcel of why this isn't being talked about the way that it deserves. Katelyn, I know you've worked quite a bit very closely with folks at the CDC. How is this all hitting you?
Not great, Abdul. I mean, it's been heartbreaking. Those weren't just any random buildings. It was a mass shooting. I mean, the intention was a massacre. And thankfully, thank God that didn't happen because of security. I don't know if anyone's been to the CDC campus, but it is very secure, sometimes very annoyingly so, but I'm so thankful it is. There's this daycare in the front of the CDC office, and I couldn't imagine what those parents are going through with all their kids in there during lockdown. And an officer lost his life and really stopped a massacre from happening, and forever grateful for that. There were 4 buildings that were hit on the CDC campus. One of the hardest hit was building 21, which is where all the immunization offices are. We have no idea if that was purposeful or not, given that it seems like the motive is around the COVID-19 vaccine. But that those were my friends' desks. They were in there. And I got a ton of texts and phone calls and videos sent to me Friday night. And it's really hard to get your head around all of this. I think it's even harder to see how crappy the aftermath has been, or lack thereof. I think it's heartbreaking that this is the 10th story on New York Times, right? Like, this isn't even the top story, which tells us how much of a shit show we're in right now, right? Like, it just validates how heavy the world is. And I think that makes me angry. I think it makes me angry we haven't heard anything from really anyone on both sides of the aisle. And when public health the past 2 or 3 years, I've been really proud of us for listening and talking about lessons learned during the pandemic and reaching out. But it's a two-way street. It is a two-way street. And if there's no give, it's hard to understand how there's going to be take. And that makes me really sad. But I don't know. I just have a lot of jumbled thoughts in my brain right now, but it's been really hard.
Yeah. I'm really sorry. And certainly to all of those who are affected, you got to imagine, you're right. The difference between a potential massacre. I mean, a guy came at the CDC with 5 guns, sprayed 180 bullets, and the difference between a massacre with upwards of dozens of lives lost and a situation in which a heroic law enforcement officer lost his life saving them, the difference between that is minimal. And I think we take it for granted. And it's also, you forget that these are people who've come to work every day to do nothing but to keep their fellow Americans safe and secure in their own lives. And in some respects, the fact that you're just getting so little response, even from in the media, is kind of a metaphor of the challenge of public health in the first place. It's like you exist to prevent the worst from happening. And because
Mhm.
the worst did not happen, we don't pay attention rather than take the fact that the worst didn't happen and invest to make sure the worst doesn't happen. We ignore the whole situation in the first place. And that's kind of what's happening here. And the other part of it is also the degree to which I think so many in public life, and I mean that to mean politicians, I mean that to mean the media, have taken Donald Trump and Donald Trump's acolytes as their assignment editors about what we pay attention to and what really matters is actually kind of surreal, right? And you see that in a situation like this one where, the implicit instruction is that this is not a big deal, not for us to be worried about. And the irony of this whole thing is that this is all happening on the same day in which Donald Trump is trying to marshal federal law enforcement onto the streets in Washington, D.C., despite the fact that crime rates are down at near their lowest rate. And so it's not that they don't want to respond to federal law enforcement, it's that they don't deem the CDC important enough to protect. And we've seen that in the rhetoric, and we're seeing that now.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about that, but we'll see what happens. I'm really curious to see if this is the last straw for CDC employees. If we're just going to see this mass exodus, if there's going to be some sort of revolt, or I don't know what it is. But what is very clear is that this has been a very long 6 years for us in public health, and very much feels like Friday was a big tipping point, and it breaks my heart. So, well, yeah, we'll see what happens.
The last thing to say on this is just, this person was motivated by conspiracy theories. And the person who's ostensibly overseeing the CDC right now is somebody who's pushed a lot of the very same conspiracy theories. We talk about these conspiracy theories and the mis and disinformation that's driven as being these sort of like esoteric things that reduce the probability of people doing certain things. But there's also damage to be done when you start to draw associations between vaccines that were created to save people's lives and the argument that somehow these are driving people's depression or suicidality with no evidence to substantiate that. So the whole situation is just, it is sickening. It is heart wrenching. Our hearts go out to the people who show up every day at the CDC to keep us safe, and certainly to the family of the slain law enforcement officer who gave his life to keep them safe. And we hope that, this is a moment for all of us to start asking, what does it take to protect the people who protect us from folks who have weaponized our government against reason and against science? All right. There's another startling update from last week, which is this new executive order that wants to rewrite the rules for how scientific grants are decided. Katelyn, I know you've been covering this quite a bit. You want to fill us in?
Yeah, so this is an executive order from the Trump administration, and it's nothing less than a sweeping overhaul of how the US government funds scientific research. So, for decades, the process for awarding grants at agencies at like NIH has been relatively insulated from partisan politics, right? So, we have these things called peer review panels of scientists that basically evaluate the merit of a research question. Career civil servants sign off, and political appointees who are ultimately in charge, that hasn't really changed, rarely intervene, though, in individual funding decisions. And the system, I've been part of this system, right? I've gotten grants from the NIH. It is far from perfect, but it has been the standard for ensuring that our tax dollars go to the most promising science that is not politically convenient science. And this executive order really upends that. It gives political appointees the final say in which what research gets funded, and even allows them to terminate existing grants for convenience. And it basically requires all grant announcements and funding decisions to be reviewed through this political filter aligned with the president's priorities. They're billing it basically as accountability and quote unquote oversight. Um, but I really truly believe this is a formal mechanism to insert partisan politics in what has been a very independent, evidence-based process. Um, and so we'll see what happens. I don't think that this has to get struck down in court, right, Abdul? I just don't see any other way.
If we had an objective Supreme Court, I would agree with you. I don't think we have an objective Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has given a lot of leeway to the executive branch, and the executive branch as instantiated by the person of the president, right? And if they choose to interpret it this way, they're going to give a lot more power to the president's appointees, who are acting by definition on behalf of the president. And so I will be interested to watch this. But if I'm watching this court and trying to see where the puck is headed, I don't love what I'm predicting here. The other part of this, though, is you have to understand it within the broader context of what this administration has been doing. This is an attempt to take on and take down all of the institutions of free thinking in America, right? This is part and parcel of suing UCLA for $1 billion or going after Columbia University or Harvard. This is all about trying to take down from the knees a lot of our country's largest and most powerful institutions of free thinking, our universities. And this is just part of that. And so when you can limit grants based on, partisan politics, to your point, it creates a situation in which you are now flexing on the very foundations of what you're allowed to think, and get resources to continue to think in institutions that are built to think. And so this is, really dangerous. And I just want folks to understand that, the thing that we've often taken for granted is that, whoever is the sort of white snow cap above the mountain, on the top of the mountain, that changes. But like what the mountain is a product of an objective, evidence-driven assessment, and a group of civil servants who come forward every day and come to work to try and get the best outcomes in whatever agency they work in. When you start giving a lot of power to the very top in terms of the decisions that are supposed to be pushed down into the agencies, that is a pretty serious backslide into authoritarianism. We want our scientists to be able to pursue science where it leads them, not where it leads them and a partisan hack thinks it's okay to go, right? And that's kind of what's being created here.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, Abdul, right? This is basically a fundamental redefinition of the relationship between government and science. And I'm very concerned about the precedent it sets too, right? That research funding is just another partisan lever. And that's just not how you lead the world in innovation. And it is not how you move towards a healthier America for all. It's how you fall behind. And I'll be very curious to see if we can pull ourselves out of that, uh, either through the courts or through public thinking or through reverse orders in a few years. But we're seeing this play out in a lot of levers of government right now.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, right? If you think about what the competition internationally is for the brightest minds and the future of you name the industry, you want the ability to chase science where it's headed, and to attract the sharpest minds from all over the world to work on these problems. And I worry that given all of this, we are very quickly exiting the competition in ways that we will not be able to catch up in the long term. So this is a really damaging outcome.
Scientists are going to leave. I mean, I would if politics is going to start impacting the research questions I can ask, why not just go to Europe or Canada or China or I don't know, like anywhere, right? I just don't get the long game here. And scientists are we are such boring, geeky people that like we're in it for the mission. And if the mission isn't there, I think the vast majority will just leave. And that's a really scary thought to say as a scientist in the United States. And we're seeing it in the polls. I think I just saw a poll like last week that 70% of scientists are thinking about moving abroad right now. And this executive order hasn't even been implemented. There's some big costs to that, short term as well as long term. All right, another shit show is happening. Am I allowed to say that? We saw the return of Vinay Prasad to the FDA last week. He was ousted 2 weeks ago after hitting the skids with MAGA, specifically Laura Loomer, which is this influencer who has incredible sway over the Trump administration. It's actually pretty incredible. But now he's back. What happened, Abdul? What do you think happened? There's not a lot of clarity what's going on right now.
There's not a lot of clarity, and I think so just to review, like run back the tape. Prasad said he left because he didn't want to become what he was characterizing as a distraction for the administration. And he had left because Laura Loomer cherry picked some information where he didn't even go after Trump or Trumpism, that he just appeared to endorse some quote unquote left wing ideas like guaranteeing everybody healthcare in America. And so he left on his own accord. And Marty McCary was not very happy, who was his boss at the FDA. And the fact that he's back says a little bit more about who's up and who's down in Trump world. Maybe Laura Loomer has stopped wielding a lot of the club that she had in the past, and there's been a lot of chatter in Trump world about some ties that folks stipulate could exist between her and some corporations, given who she goes after and what they're regulating. And so, who knows? I'm not one to speculate on who's up and who's down in Trump world, but that is to say that you are seeing another very popular, very loud voice who has dabbled in the kind of questionable information tactics that this administration and all of its leaders have often been a part of. And so, while I do respect Vinay Prasad's academic training and some of the work that he's done in the past, the way he's chosen to use his mouthpiece, I think A, opens him up to a lot of this who's up, who's down politicking, and B, doesn't always bode well for bringing to the fore the most honest, direct, evidence-based decision making that we'd want to see out of a critical center at the FDA.
Yeah, and we'll see what Loomer has up her sleeve. I didn't know about the industry ties or the hypothesis of that. But I mean, what she said following the announcement of Prasad returning is that, quote, I will be ramping up my exposés on officials within HHS and FDA so the American people can see more of the pay for play rot themselves. So we'll see if she has more up her sleeve, but it is power grabbing. And how much this will influences FDA ability to do anything, I think will be very interesting to see unfold in the next couple weeks and months and years.
Yeah, no, it will. And the reality of it is that it is a pretty crazy thing that this particular influencer. So I've had some unfortunate interactions with Laura Loomer in the past, and
You
she's
have?
truly uh, in when I ran for governor in 2018. Her and some of her goons waited in line to try and catch me on camera talking about questions of my allegiance to the United States, which Laura Loomer is a self-proclaimed Islamophobe, so you can imagine what prompted this.
Oh my God.
But she is truly if there's an id of the Trump administration, let's just say that it's Laura Loomer. And the fact that this individual who has zero accountability to anybody has this kind of power to make or break administration officials, that should be really scary to everybody.
Not uplifting. But all right, Abdul, who'd you talk to this week?
Well, I did have an uplifting conversation.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
yes, no, we needed to save this episode somehow. I had a conversation with Sherrell Byrd. She's the executive director of SOWEGA Rising. SOWEGA, by the way, is short for Southwest Georgia, and she's been an advocate for health and food access in the region. This, of course, is a really low-income rural part of the state that's responsible for a lot of the state's farming, despite the fact that a lot of folks in the state, despite being such a farming haven, don't have access to the kinds of fruits and vegetables that are part of a healthy diet. And she's been pushing a lot of that to take on some of the food deserts in those communities. And she brings a really uplifting approach to thinking about how we can work together to build the kind of communities that provide very basic things like food for folks in her state and across our country. So I hope that folks will stick around. If the beginning of this episode was as depressing as it was for Katelyn and I know that the back end of the episode will be a bit more uplifting. So I hope that folks will stick around.
Solutions. I love to hear solutions. Can't wait to hear.
How are the kids?
Kids are okay.
Good. Mine
We
too.
start school next week. It's
You
not
said
in
kindergarten?
first grade.
First grade.
So she's
Okay.
like actually starting school, at least here at our school. Kindergarten was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
2 hours a day, but now we're doing like,
School,
yeah,
school.
school,
Yeah, I
school.
mean, he's going to second grade. Sitting's still in daycare, but
When do your schools start in Michigan?
not next week, but the week after.
Okay. Okay. You'll be
Yeah,
right behind us.
she got her new school backpack. She's very excited about.
Oh, I
So,
need to take
very
mine
cute.
shopping. Um, yeah, it's crazy. Summer's done. Like absolutely insane.
Do you remember when you were a kid and summer felt like it lasted for like months and months and months?
Yes, I do.
I
And it
feel
was
like now it's just
glorious.
like, yeah, you turn a corner and like you're now into the fall. So, but hey, uh, fall is football season. My Wolverines are ranked number 14 in the country, and
Pumpkin
we did beat Ohio
spice
State last year.
latte.
And Michigan fall is like fall. It's like
Yeah,
we deliver a fantastic fall.
that's amazing. We do not, but we still have pumpkin patches.
Hey,
We do what we can.
you do what you got to do, and then you go surfing. So don't complain too much.
That is true. My God, Abdul, my 4-year-old went surfing this weekend and it was so much fun. It was
Oh
so
yeah.
much fun. It brought me so much joy after such a shitty weekend with the news of
Oh,
CDC. I was like laughing so hard. I started like hurting my cheeks. So it was good.
it's those moments where you got to hug your kids a little tighter, right? So,
100%. Yeah.
all right, friend, you be well. We'll see you next week. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Abdul.
America Dissected is brought to you by Quince. Why drop a fortune on basics when you don't have to? Quince has the good stuff, high quality fabrics, classic fits, and lightweight layers for warm weather, all at prices that make sense. Everything I've ordered from Quince has been nothing but solid. Quince has closet staples you'll want to reach for over and over, like cozy cashmere and cotton sweaters from just $50, breathable flow knit polos, and comfortable lightweight pants that somehow work for both weekend hangs and dress up dinners. The best part? Everything with Quince is half the cost of similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you luxury pieces without the markup. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. My Mongolian cashmere pullover is perhaps my favorite item of clothing. It's summer now, but it's going to be fall soon. And if you don't have one in your lineup, trust me, you should. It's cozy and comfortable for those crisp days, and it's casual enough to pair with jeans, but refined enough for an elevated look. The quality is incredible. No pulling or pilling, and the price point for this, it can't be beat. Keep it classic and cool with long-lasting staples from Quince. Go to quince.com/AD for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/AD to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/AD. All right, let's get started. Can you introduce yourself for the tape?
Yes, hey everyone. My name is Sherrell Byrd. I'm the founder and executive director of SOWEGA Rising, where we believe that, as W.E.B. Du Bois says, so goes the South, so goes the nation. And so we're uplifting rural communities and the issues that impact rural communities, like food justice, in our work.
I want to talk just stepping back because I think when we think, especially right now, considering where the conversation is about starvation, particularly in Gaza, we don't think of hunger as being an American problem, but it so profoundly is. Can you tell us a little bit about the state of hunger and food insecurity in the communities that you serve?
Yeah, so very wild statistic. The community that I live in is Southwest Georgia. So we're in the southwest corner of the state of Georgia, which is commonly touted as, number three when it comes to the film industry, number one in the country when it comes to business. But that's typically referring to Atlanta. Outside of Atlanta, in the state of Georgia, many communities are suffering. And so, wild statistic for Southwest Georgia, we're actually in the top 1% of food insecurity in the nation. And so
Wow.
many of our communities rival that of third world countries when it comes to hunger and lack of access to quality, healthy food. So there are quite a few people in rural areas who are not getting the food to their plates, despite us being largely agricultural. Despite there being farms all around us in this area that provide food to grocery stores and restaurants really all over the country, but that food is not making it to the plates of the citizens that live right here in this community. And so it's a growing issue that is yet to be addressed in many regards by our leaders.
Can you tell us a little bit about the causes? Like why, in the richest, most powerful country in the world, what keeps the food that's being grown in your local community from getting to plates in the same local community where it's grown?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's very multi-layered. I would say the first being just overwhelming divestment from rural areas. We've seen, particularly in Albany, a trend in our community since probably the early 90s where we've had a rash of natural disasters that have hit this area. So we've had floods, we've had tornadoes, hurricanes, and most recently in 2020, we were hit by the major pandemic of COVID, which we found ourselves second in the nation and fourth in the world for incidences of COVID 19 per population. And so these types of things really start to unravel communities and their ability to rebuild after these natural disasters. So what that looks like for our community, it's projected that Georgia actually, as a state, has spent over $107 billion in disaster recovery. But for rural communities, that really does look like industries leaving the area. And when those industries leave the area, they take with them a large amount of the infrastructure that it needs to support these communities. And that's your grocery stores, that's your pharmacies, that's those places that people need, the hospitals, even. We've seen a huge spike in rural hospital closures as well. So, those important resources that rural communities need, it creates like a gaping black hole when these industries leave these areas, which results in food insecurity. The other thing is there's just a lack of access when it comes to things like farmers markets and gardens. And so, one of the things that we're aiming to do is teach people how to start these things in their communities as well. So, it's a lot. And then the last thing I'll say is just policies, being able to have policies that prevent the growth of what we call predatory markets, like your Walmarts, your Dollar Generals, those types of stores drive out retail and grocery stores. And what they replace them with are these, again, predatory markets, convenience stores, alcohol outlets that provide food that has really no caloric intake. They don't have any nutritional value, and they really do drain the communities when it comes to food access. And so we need better policies in America that govern the overpopulation of those types of predatory markets, particularly in rural areas.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing this because, when I was in the city of Detroit leading there, one of the challenges was that you ended up having just a complete glut of the traditional kind of food market, whether that's a grocery store or a fresh food market, and you end up having most people buying food at a liquor store or a party store or a convenience store. And so what that means is that that food tends to be very rich in the kinds of macronutrients that are going to grow a belly. A lot of it's golden brown, right? It's some sort of fried food, or it's boxed, highly processed, ultra processed foods, but it's not the food that's rich in the micronutrients that grow a brain, particularly a developing brain. And so you don't have fresh fruits and vegetables that are affordable. Sometimes I might have apples, oranges, and bananas, but that's it, right? And the distance that people have to travel to actually get to fresh fruits and vegetables is so large in the setting of very few transportation options that really the convenience store and the liquor store is really the only quote unquote convenient spot, because
Right.
we've programmed inconvenience into the life of a lot of these folks, right, by virtue of not investing in access there. And so what happens is, right, the picture of food insecurity is not what you might see from a starving child in a place like Gaza or South Sudan. The picture tends to be, of massive caloric overabundance, but that's still micronutrient deficient, and it reflects a certain inaccess to consistent food. That's the interesting thing about food insecurity, right? Food insecurity is both associated with starvation, but it's also associated with obesity. And that's the thing people don't realize, is that like in the micro scale, if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, the incentive you have with the meal in front of you is to eat the whole thing, because you don't know where your next calories are coming from. And so
Absolutely.
if you're consistently getting micronutrient poor but macronutrient dense foods, right, then that's going to shape your life in a particular way. Neither of these things is healthy, and both of them the function of inaccess to the right kinds of foods. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you do at SOWEGA Rising to be able to take on food insecurity in your local community?
Yeah, and I want to draw a correlation to what you just mentioned as well with that story. And so we were founded in 2019, and it was really the divine timing that we were founded when we did, because little did we know that in 2020 we would be facing a huge presidential election, the decennial census, major social unrest in the country, like around George Floyd and other uprisings of police brutality, and a pandemic. And so when we heard about the pandemic, we knew just how devastating that would be for a community like ours. We just didn't know the magnitude. And so when we heard of the first case reaching Georgia, we quickly started mobilizing our organization. We were very new at the time. We didn't have a lot of funding, but we knew, because of what you said, the proliferation of the convenience stores and how that correlates to obesity, but also how that correlates to the very high comorbidities that we have in our community, which we know COVID-19 preys upon those comorbidities. And so here in Albany, Georgia, we have some of the highest rates of cancers, diabetes, heart and lung diseases, sickle cell diseases. That rival Atlanta. And we're not in any way the size of Atlanta, but our statistics rival Atlanta, where we're second in the state with many of these health issues. And so when COVID hit, it exploded because of that reason. And so to draw that correlation to your point, while we don't see the same types of wartime impact, right, of hunger as we're seeing in Gaza and the Sudan. And thank you for uplifting the Sudan and the Congo, right? We're seeing these things happen across the world because of wartime, but we're also seeing somewhat violence against our local communities as well when it comes to food access. These things don't happen in a vacuum. These are not organic issues. These are issues that are created by leadership. And so that's why our organization was started, because we are an advocacy organization, and our job is to go to those leaders and to tell them what their decisions are doing to the communities that they serve. We've literally seen our leaders in this community not only approve even more licensing for predatory markets only in the Black communities, but they've also now started merging alcohol outlets where they're allowing these predatory markets to actually start selling alcohol in these communities as well, which is a double whammy, right? So we talk about alcohol density and the impact that has on Black communities. All of this it plays a key factor in things like obesity, health, crime, right? It's all connected. And so those are the types of things we go to leaders and we talk to them about how they're contributing to these issues with their decisions that they're making at the local level, so that we can get policies and we can get change. We're not always successful, but we do a great job at mobilizing the community, educating them on the impact of these things, and then creating our own initiatives and interventions that we can try to implement ourselves to try our best to try to curb the problem.
It's a pretty crazy thing, but like in so many communities in our country, it is easier to get a fifth of vodka than it is to get a head of lettuce.
This is very true.
And that's a pretty insane thing. And yeah, I mean, it breaks the heart and boggles the mind, right? Because these communities tend to look very similar. They tend to be places that are heavily influenced by outside corporate actors, tend to be predominantly Black, can be urban or rural. And there's always this aspect of the demand side. There's this blame that's placed on people about, people choose. Well, a choice is a function. If everybody who's ever taken a multiple choice test, imagine you had 4 answers and the right answer wasn't there. Right. And now you've only got 3 answers that are all wrong, but you're asked to choose the right one. And we don't appreciate that, our economy feels like a rigged multiple choice exam sometimes, where people blame folks for quote unquote the wrong choices when the quote unquote right choices aren't even available. And, that you see that replicate itself in so many communities. And then we forget that, the proliferation of a lot of these things, right? Like if it makes it easy to get a lotto ticket and alcohol, that's not just a function of choices. That's a function of these industries spending a lot of time and effort to lobby their local electeds to make it easier to get their product where they want to place it, right? And
Absolutely.
even when it comes to the food lobby, right, there's not a lettuce lobby, right? There's like a corn and soy lobby, right, which is what tends to get grown most of all in our country. But there's not like a lettuce lobby or a broccoli lobby, right? And then we ask these questions about why these things aren't available. Now, you all have been doing a lot of this advocacy, both counter and also for. What does success look like to you, and what are some of the challenges to that kind of success?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the things we were able to do, we've done some really great things. We created the Southwest Georgia Food Justice Coalition specifically to, after COVID-19, to address the impact of food insecurity on health. And so that coalition was comprised of a lot of grassroots organizations, but also churches, our local public health department, um, our local universities, Albany State University, Georgia Tech, UGA, all of these big actors that came together at just the perfect time to allow us to do interventions, but those interventions were research based. And so one of the things that I'm really proud of was we created a food data hub that allowed us to map in our community where are all the convenience stores, fast food restaurants, liquor stores, and then track with each of those or those businesses, who has fresh food, who doesn't have fresh food, who has expired food. Even like many of these convenience stores, the food is expired on the shelves. And so we were able to track that and then overlay those maps with the health rates and the crime rates so that we can paint a picture to our leaders, a true depiction of what this problem looks like. And it was a very powerful moment to be able to show this to leaders, because unfortunately we can go to them and say we don't want this in our community, but that falls on deaf ears. So we've learned we have to have the data and the graphs and the charts and the colors and the pictures to really illustrate to them so in ways that they'll hear us how prevalent the issue is. So we're very proud of that. We took that data and then we then created a food behavior needs assessment. And we used that survey to sample about 200 people in our community to learn what their food behaviors are and what it would look like if they had access to healthy fruits and vegetables, and what are the barriers that keep them from accessing these things. And so we learned very clearly that people want and would eat the healthy produce and the healthy fruits and vegetables and the lettuces and the broccolis if it were in their community. And many of the barriers that they experienced was not having transportation. We live in rural areas, so we don't have mass public transit. So people were traveling on a bus anywhere upwards of an hour and 30 minutes to 2 hours one way just to get to the nearest grocery store by bus. That's a lot for a person that's low income with no transportation, or an elderly person even, to have to carry groceries on a bus and then have a 2 hour there and 2 hour back trip. So that was a barrier. Also, cost is a barrier, right? For some reason in America, we make fresh fruits and vegetables a premium cost. And so people just literally said it's just not affordable for them, even with food stamps or other public assistance. It really was just unaffordable for them to eat healthy foods the way they would like to. And so these types of data we were able to use to be able to create interventions. And so some of those interventions were we created what was called the Veggie and Soul Project. And this project was a plant-based interventive diet that we sampled with about 25 people for over 6 to 8 weeks. We were able to measure all of their baseline health rates, and we were able to take them through a program where they were given plant-based diets, fresh produce, nutritional classes, cooking demos, as well as pre-planned meals over the course of 6 to 8 weeks. And by the end of that intervention, these were all African American. We wanted to make sure that we sample African Americans to show that if you still create the diet, the African American cuisine, and which preserves the seasoning and the culture and the things that African Americans know and love about our food, but replace the meat with plant and show them how to use that, the seasonings, to be able to live a plant-based diet. What would their health outcomes look like? At the end of this program, Abdul, every single person that participated lost anywhere from 20 to 50 pounds in 6 to 8 weeks. And
Wow.
most, if not all of them, were taken off of all of their medications. It blew the minds of their doctors to see that they were so healthy after 6 weeks that they were wondering what happened. So we were really, really proud of that, to be able to demonstrate that a plant-based diet, if you preserve the African American culture and food, that it will actually help turn around health rates and the obesity and the comorbidities that we're seeing that are prevalent in our community. And then from there, we've done so many other things. Like we've launched, one of our partners launched a mobile grocery store that goes directly into low income areas. We've launched several farmers markets that we were able to take into areas. We've launched health fairs, all sorts of interventions that specifically go into the highest food insecure areas, so that we can continue to do our part in the interim to bring fresh fruits and access and vegetables and access to those very high food insecure areas.
That's really exciting and really compelling, as those outcomes are really impressive. I want to ask you though, because it's just when you start to get some success, you watch the ground get pulled out from underneath you, and part of that has been SNAP benefits, a critical program that provides access to food in low income communities. What does the pullback, the clawback of federal SNAP benefits mean for communities like the one you serve?
It's going to be detrimental because this is like a lifeline for many people, like food benefits, SNAP benefits, our Medicaid benefits. That's our safety net for many people who live in rural areas where people still are underemployed, right? We still have a proliferation of retail stores as the only jobs in some communities, where people only work part time and they're barely making $7, $8 an hour. We still live in communities where utilities are extremely high. People in low income communities are paying anywhere from $800 to $1,000 a month in utility costs. So those types of things drain, right, a person's budget. So SNAP benefits are a lifeline for people to be able to feed their families until our country is able to do things like increase minimum wage so that people can live a livable wage and be able to pay these increasing bills. So we've increased all the bills in our country. We just still haven't, since the 80s, increased livable wages and the minimum wage. So that's really hard for rural communities to overcome. And so SNAP benefits, taking away SNAP benefits, or even putting work requirements on people to actually have things like SNAP benefits or Medicaid health insurance is going to be detrimental because we are so underemployed in rural parts of Georgia. The other thing that people are very concerned about is we still don't have rural broadband. And so a lot of these communities that are going to be forced to continue to do annual check-ins or report annual work requirements, they're going to have really real challenges in rural areas because we still don't have adequate broadband in these communities. So we've heard from people directly that that's going to be a challenge as well. So there's a lot of things that aren't being considered for rural areas. We're gonna see a lot of seniors and veterans that are going to be impacted by this, who again rely on these benefits to be able to feed themselves. And so I'm really, really nervous about how many people will go hungry. Because, or we'll have a huge influx of our nonprofit sector really being burdened by the influx of people coming to our churches and our food pantries for food, and they don't have the funding and the resources to support these folks also. And so right now, a lot of conversations are happening right now in our communities about how do we provide these safety nets? How do we start to teach people even how to be self-sufficient, right? How can you start your own kitchen gardens in your backyard so that you can at least have food growing in your backyards? And so that's one of the initiatives we're starting. We're also looking to create micro farms in low-income communities so that people can share produce and be able to supply enough food to at least feed the people in their neighborhood. So that's what we have right now. We have to unite and we have to be creative and come up with sustainable ways in which we can support ourselves. Because, yeah, this is going to be a tough next 4 years in rural areas without SNAP benefits and other safety net programs.
Yeah. And then, you said it well, but when folks don't have healthy foods, there are a whole number of health outcomes that happen as a function of that, including diabetes, heart disease, several different kinds of cancers. And the community that you take care of suffers that more. And then we're watching as a lot of these Medicaid cuts are going to come on the back end and strip away access to healthcare, particularly in rural communities. I want to ask you what the impact of the Medicaid cuts is going to mean for a lot of the folks who've suffered on the front end without access to the healthy food that they need and deserve.
Devastating. Again, some of the issues I named with the SNAP benefits are going to also translate over with folks that are in the coverage gap right now. That's our college students, our seniors, our people that are chronically ill, that aren't able to work, aren't able to meet this work requirement. I just learned that Georgia was one of the first states to apply for the work requirement to be passed in our state. And so, but a lot of people aren't able to work for various reasons, but they still need health care. They still should be entitled to have health coverage. So that's going to be a major issue. We're going to have an influx of high medical debt, right? People are still going to need to get the care. They just won't have the insurance coverage to pay for it. And so medical debt is going to hit people's credit reports, which was one of the fights we fought the last couple of years. We actually were part of a contingency of organizations that went to our federal government to appeal for medical debt to be removed off of credit reports so that people can at least have some sort of a quality of life to be able to purchase a home, purchase a car, or even in some instances, you can't get a job without passing a credit check. And so we were successful. We were able to get that passed up until this administration came in, and now that implementation is being challenged in courts. Or I think it's actually been thrown out as unconstitutional. So unfortunately, this will now be back on people's credit, right? This will now impact their credit reports. And so it's just a cyclical effect, right? These are the types of things that keep people in pervasive poverty, which in our community, our poverty rates are higher than the national average and higher than the state average. So we're very impoverished in these parts of the state. And that poverty will again translate into medical debt, which will then translate into hospitals and their ability to cover these costs as well, which is why we saw the rash of hospital closures in rural areas. We're finally starting to get some of those hospitals online, but now again, we may see even those locations being threatened again because of the rollback of the Medicaid benefits and the lack of expansion of Medicaid across the state. So it will have a ripple effect across rural Georgia.
Yeah, and if you think about the continuum of all this, we're to stop funding access to healthier foods, and then we're going to figure out how to make sure that you can't get access to Medicaid, which means that your rural hospital is going to be on the cusp of closing. And by the way, when you take on medical debt because of all that, we're going to make sure it dings your credit so that you can't get access to capital in the form of a loan for a home or a car, which is just going to make your inaccess to food worse. And to your point, it's just one big cycle. And it's hard not to think that this is just about criminalizing poverty. I guess, as we wrap here, I want to ask you, what gives you hope in this moment? How are you trying to find glimpses of meaning as you fight like hell for the people that you represent in your community?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question because we're having that conversation now. People are just depleted by this administration. We're seeing that in our voter turnout, where people are just not showing up to vote in local elections. It's become abysmal. And so we're noticing and really trying to have a pulse on just community joy right now. Where are people and how they're feeling and how they're showing up right now? And so we're seeing that impact in so many other ways. And so as an organization, we're trying to find ways to infuse joy back into our communities by just having events where people can come together and be in community with each other. I think that's our greatest strength right now, is just coming together and uniting ourselves, but also creating alternatives. I think right now we're seeing what looks like the rock bottom of our democracy is actually an opportunity for us to just dismantle the system in our own ways and create new systems. And that again takes an incredible, huge amount of unity, but it also takes out the box thinking. Like, what are ways in which we can make ourselves and our communities sustainable and make ourselves self-sufficient, so that when these changes in administrations come and these strange changes in policies that are so harmful, how can we strengthen our communities so that we can weather these types of changes in administration? And so again, that's creating all sorts of pathways to healing. Like, we're talking about doing things like community yoga, community solar, community gardens, micro farms, disaster preparedness, so that people are able to take care of their own communities in times of disaster. Just all the ways in which we can show our communities that you have power, but power comes in unity. Power comes in us creating our own ways in which we sustain ourselves during these times. That keeps me excited and hopeful as well. Because we're all we have. All we have are us to save us. No one's coming to save us. And being able to unite ourselves, that's the greatest power we have. And so I'm excited about that. That keeps me going, knowing that we're not helpless. We're not hopeless. We can be empowered during this time.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. And I really appreciate you and your inspiration, your leadership. Our guest today was Sherrell Byrd. She's the founder and CEO of SOWEGA Rising. We really appreciate you coming and joining us today and sharing your work and your leadership and what brings you hope in a moment like this.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today. You can find more content on our website, incisionmedia.co. Check out our shop at store.americadissected.com for our new America Dissected merch, including our logo shirts, hoodies, and mugs. And don't miss out on our Vaccines Work, Science Matters t-shirts. If you have guest recommendations for the show, send us an email at info@incisionmedia.co. You can follow or subscribe to America Dissected on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube at America Dissected. And you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and X at Abdul no dash. And make sure to subscribe to Katelyn's incredible newsletter, Your Local Epidemiologist, which breaks down the latest scientific evidence for over 300,000 followers. You can search for Your Local Epidemiologist on Substack. Links to all our sponsors are available right here in the show notes. I really do hope you'll check them out and show them some love. They make the show possible every single week. Finally, on your way out, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, drop us a like or a comment. Word of mouth still goes a long way too, so if you know someone who might like to keep up with everything that's happening in the world of health, please do let them know. America Dissected is a product of Incision Media. Our co-host is Dr. Katelyn Jetelina. Our producer is Andy Gardner-Bernstein. Video and audio editing by Nadine Malkonian. Our theme song is by Taka Suzawa and Alex Ugiera. Sales and marketing by Joel Fowler and Nick Freeman at Big Little Media. Our executive producers are Tara Knight and me, Dr. Abdul your host. Thanks for listening. This show is for general information and entertainment purposes only. It's not intended to provide specific healthcare or medical advice and should not be construed as providing healthcare or medical advice. Please consult your own physician with any questions related to your own health.